Louis XV, known as Louis the Beloved, was a monarch of the House of Bourbon who ruled as King of France from 1 September 1715 until his death. He succeeded his great-grandfather Louis XIV at the age of 5. Until he reached maturity in 1723, his kingdom was ruled by Philippe II, Duke of Orléans as regent of France. The Duke was his maternal great-uncle, as well as first cousin twice removed patrilineally. Cardinal Fleury was his chief minister from 1726 until the cardinal's death in 1743, at which time the young king took sole control of the kingdom. During his reign, Louis returned the Austrian Netherlands. This territory was won at the Battle of Fontenoy of 1745 but given back to Austria by the terms of the Treaty of X La Chapelle of 1748. Louis also ceded New France in North America to Spain and Great Britain at the conclusion of the 7 Years' War in 1763. He incorporated the territories of Lorraine and Corsica into the Kingdom of France. He was succeeded by his grandson Louis XVI in 1774. Most scholars believe Louis XV's decisions damaged the power of France, weakened the treasury, discredited the absolute monarchy, and made it more vulnerable to distrust and destruction, as happened in the French Revolution, which broke out 15 years after his death. Norman Davies characterized Louis XV's reign as one of debilitating stagnation, characterized by lost wars, endless clashes between the court and parliament, and religious feuds. A few scholars defend Louis, arguing that his highly negative reputation was based on propaganda meant to justify the French Revolution. Jerome Bloom described him as a perpetual adolescent called to do a man's job. Background and early life. Louis XV was born in the Palace of Versailles on 15 February 1710 during the reign of his great-grandfather Louis XIV. His grandfather, Louis le Grand Dauphin, had 3 sons with his wife Marie-Anne Victoire of Bavaria: Louis, Duke of Burgundy; Philippe, Duke of Anjou; and Charles, Duke of Berry. Louis XV was the 3rd son of the Duke of Burgundy and his wife Marie-Adélaïde of Savoy, the eldest daughter of Victor Amadeus II, Duke of Savoy, and Anne-Marie d'Orléans. At birth, Louis XV received a customary title for younger sons of the French royal family, Duke of Anjou. In April 1711, Louis le Grand Dauphin suddenly died, making Louis XV's father, the Duke of Burgundy, the new Dauphin. At that time, Burgundy had 2 living sons, Louis, Duke of Brittany, and his youngest son, the future Louis XV. A year later, Marie-Adélaïde, Duchess of Burgundy, contracted smallpox and died on 12 February 1712. Her husband, said to be heartbroken by her death, died the same week, also having contracted smallpox. Within a week of his death, it was clear that the couple's 2 children had also been infected. The elder son was repeatedly treated by bloodletting in an unsuccessful effort to save him. Fearing that the Dauphin would die, the court had both the Dauphin and the Duke of Anjou baptized. The Dauphin died the same day, the 8th of March 1712. His younger brother, the Duke of Anjou, was personally treated by his governess, Madame de Ventadour, who forbade any bloodletting. He survived the smallpox and, at the age of 2, became first in the line of succession to his great-grandfather Louis XIV. Louis XIV's will on 1 September 1715. Louis XIV died of gangrene, having reigned for 72 years. In August 1714, Louis XIV had made a will stipulating that the nation was to be governed by a regency council made up of 14 members until the new king reached the age of majority. Philippe, Duke of Orléans, nephew of Louis XIV, was named president of the council, but all decisions were to be made by majority vote. The composition of the council, which included Louis XIV's legitimized sons, the Duke of Maine and Count of Toulouse, and various members of Louis XIV's administration, meant that the Duke of Orleans would often be outvoted. Philippe, Duke of Orleans as regent, Orleans conducted affairs of state from his Palais Royal. The young Louis XV was moved to the modern lodgings attached to the medieval fortress of Vincennes, located 7 kilometers (4.5 miles) east of Paris in the forest of Vincennes. The air was deemed more wholesome than in Paris. A few weeks later, with winter, the young king was moved to the Tuileries Palace near the Palais Royal. Youth by French royal tradition, princes were put in the care of men when they reached their 7th birthdays. Louis was taken from his governess, Madame de Ventadour, in February 1717, and placed in the care of François de Villeroy, who had been designated as his governor in Louis XIV's will of August 1714. François de Villeroy served under the formal authority of the Duke of Maine, who was charged with overseeing the king's education. He was aided by André Hercule de Fleury, who served as the king's tutor. Fleury gave the king an excellent education, and the king was also taught by renowned professors such as the geographer Guillaume de Lille. Louis XV had an inquisitive and open-minded nature. An avid reader, he developed eclectic tastes. Later in life he advocated the creation of departments in physics and mechanics at the Collège de France. Betrothal and marriage in 1721, Louis XV at the age of 11 was betrothed to his first cousin, the Infanta Maria Ana Victoria of Spain. The 11-year-old king was not interested in the arrival of his future wife, the 3-year-old Spanish Infanta. In June 1722, the king and the court returned to Versailles, where they resided until the end of the reign. In October of the same year, Louis XV was officially crowned in Reims Cathedral. On the 15th of February 1723, the king's majority was declared by the Parlement of Paris. This ended the regency. Initially, Louis XV left the Duke of Orleans in charge of state affairs. Made first minister on the death of Cardinal Dubois in August 1723, the Duke of Orleans died in December of the same year. Following the advice of Fleury, Louis XV appointed his cousin, Louis Henry, Duke of Bourbon, to replace the late Duke of Orleans. The Duke of Bourbon was worried about the health of the young king. He wanted to prevent the family of the late regent, the House of Orleans, from ascending to the throne should the king die, as he considered the Orleans family his enemy. The king was quite frail as a boy, and several alerts led to concern for his life. There was also concern that the Spanish Infanta, 8 years younger than the king, was too young to bear an heir in a timely way. To remedy this situation, the Duke of Bourbon set about choosing a European princess old enough to produce an heir. Eventually, the 21-year-old Marie Leszczyńska, daughter of Stanislaw I, the deposed King of Poland, was chosen. A poor and plain-looking princess who had followed her father's misfortunes, she was said to be virtuous. The marriage was celebrated in September 1725, where the king was 15. The couple soon produced many children. In September 1729, in her third pregnancy, the queen finally gave birth to a male child, an heir to the throne, the Dauphin Louis. The birth of a long-awaited heir, which ensured the survival of the dynasty for the first time since 1712, was welcomed with tremendous joy and celebration in all spheres of French society. The young king became extremely popular at the time. Dismissal of Bourbon and the ministry of Fleury. The ministry of the Duke of Bourbon pursued policies that resulted in serious economic and social problems in France. These included the persecution of Protestants, monetary manipulations, the creation of new taxes, such as the 50th in 1725, and tolerance of high grain prices. As a result of Bourbon's rising unpopularity, the king dismissed him in 1726. The king selected Cardinal Fleury, his former tutor, to replace him. From 1726 until his death in 1743, Cardinal Fleury ruled France with the king's assent. It was the most peaceful and prosperous period of the reign of Louis XV, despite some unrest caused by the Parlements and the Jansenists. After the financial and social disruptions suffered at the end of the reign of Louis XIV, the rule of Fleury is seen by historians as a period of recovery. The king's role in the decisions of the Fleury government is unclear, but he did support Fleury against the intrigues of the court and the conspiracies of the courtiers. With the help of Controllers General of Finances Michel Robert Lepelletier des Forts and Philippe Torry, Fleury stabilized the French currency and balanced the budget in 1738. Economic expansion was a major goal of the government. Communications were improved with the completion of the Saint-Quentin Canal in 1738, which was later extended to the Escaut River and the Low Countries, and the systematic building of a national road network. By the middle of the 18th century, France had the most modern and extensive road network in the world. Engineers from the École Nationale des Ponts et Chaussées built modern highways, many of which are still in use today. They stretched from Paris to the most distant borders of France. The Council of Commerce stimulated trade, and French foreign maritime trade increased from 80 to 308 million livres between 1716 and 1748. Rigid Colbertist laws left over from the previous reign hindered industrial development. However, the power of the absolute monarchy was manifested by its suppression of Jansenist and Gallican religious opposition. The troubles caused by the convulsionaries of the Saint Médard graveyard in Paris were put to an end in 1732. As for the Gallican opposition, after the dismissal of 139 members of provincial parliaments, the Parliament of Paris had to register the Unigenitus papal bull and was forbidden to hear religious cases in the future. In foreign relations, Fleury sought peace by trying to maintain alliance with England and pursuing reconciliation with Spain. The birth of the king's male heir in 1729 dispelled the risks of a succession crisis and the possibility of war with Spain. In 1733, on the advice of his Minister of Foreign Affairs Germain-Louis Chauvelin, the king abandoned Fleury's peace policy to intervene in the War of the Polish Succession. In addition to attempting to restore his father-in-law Stanislaw Leszczyński to the Polish throne, the king also hoped to wrest the long-coveted Duchy of Lorraine from its Duke, Francis III. The Duke's expected marriage to Maria Theresa of Austria, daughter of Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI, would bring Austrian power dangerously close to the French border. In the end, the half-hearted French intervention did not allow Stanislaw to recover his former throne in Poland. Treaty of Vienna in the west. However, French troops rapidly overran Lorraine, and peace was restored as early as 1735. By the Treaty of Vienna, Stanislaw was compensated for the loss of his Polish throne with the Duchy of Lorraine, which would eventually pass to King Louis as his son-in-law. Duke Francis III of Lorraine was made heir to the Grand Duchy of Tuscany as compensation for the loss of Lorraine. The war cost France very little compared to the financial and human drains of Louis XIV's wars and was a clear success for French diplomacy. The acquisition of Lorraine was to be the last territorial expansion of France on the continent before the French Revolution. Shortly after this favorable result, France's mediation in the war between the Holy Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire led to the Treaty of Belgrade, which favored the Ottoman Empire, beneficiary of a Franco-Ottoman alliance against the Habsburgs since the early 16th century. As a result, the Ottoman Empire in 1740 renewed the French capitulations, which marked the supremacy of French trade in the Middle East. With these successes, Louis XV's prestige reached its highest point. The War of the Austrian Succession and first signs of unpopularity. In 1740, the death of Emperor Charles VI and his succession by his daughter, Maria Theresa, started the European War of the Austrian Succession. Sensing the vulnerability of Maria Theresa's position, King Frederick the Great of Prussia invaded the Austrian province of Silesia in hopes of annexing it permanently. The elderly Cardinal Fleury had too little energy left to oppose this war, which was strongly supported by the anti-Austrian party at court. renewing the cycle of conflicts so typical of Louis XIV's reign. The king entered the war in 1741 on the side of Prussia in hopes of pursuing its own anti-Austrian foreign policy goals. The war would last 7 years. Fleury did not live to see the end of the war. After Fleury's death, in January 1743, the king followed his predecessor's example of ruling from then on without a first minister. The war in Germany did not go well, as the French forces were forced back to the Rhine and the Bavarian allies decisively defeated. At one point Austria even considered launching an offensive against Alsace, before being compelled to retreat due to a Prussian offensive. In North Italy, the war stalled and did not produce significant results. However, these fronts were of lesser importance in contrast to the war in the Netherlands. Here, France experienced much military success despite the king's loss of his trusted advisor. Against an army composed of British, Dutch and Austrian forces, the French were able to savor a series of major victories at the battles of Fontenoy, Rocou, and Laufeld. The Battle of Fontenoy, won by Maurice de Saxe, is still remembered as one of the most decisive French victories against the British. In 1746, French forces besieged and occupied Brussels, which Louis entered in triumph. By 1748, France occupied the entire Austrian Netherlands as well as some parts of the northern Netherlands, then the wealthiest area of Europe. It appeared on its way to fulfilling its traditional dream of extending its northeastern border to the Rhine. Treaty of X La Chapelle. Despite his victory, Louis XV, who wanted to appear as an arbiter and not as a conqueror, agreed to restore all his conquests back to the defeated enemies with chivalry at the Treaty of X La Chapelle in 1748. Arguing that he was King of France, not a shopkeeper, he felt content to rule a nearly hexagon-shaped kingdom, which he called his Acute Carré, a term still used in French politics today. He thought it better to cultivate the Acute Carré rather than trying to expand it. The attitude of the king was hailed in Europe, and he became known overnight as the arbiter of Europe. This decision, largely misunderstood by his generals and by the French people, made the king unpopular at home. The news that the king had restored the southern Netherlands to Austria was met with disbelief and bitterness. The French obtained so little of what they had fought for that they adopted the expressions "bet comme la paix" and "travailler pour le roi de Prusse." Louis's popularity was also threatened by public exposure of his marital infidelities, which likely could have been kept concealed had France not entered the War of the Austrian Succession. Louis had enjoyed a good deal of happiness with his wife, but he resented her failure to produce a good supply of male children. In 1734, for the first time, the Queen complained to her father about the king's infidelities. The king took mistresses, a recognized practice at the time, while the Queen took refuge in religion and charities. The designation maîtresse en titre was a court position that was sometimes retained, even if the king and his mistress ceased being lovers. In the 1730s, Louis began a series of love affairs with 4 sisters of the Mailly-Nesle family that are documented by the formal agreements into which he entered: Diane Adélaïde de Mailly, Louise Julie de Mailly, Pauline Félicité de Mailly, and Marie-Anne de Mailly. In June 1744, the king left Versailles for the front in order to take personal command of his armies fighting in the War of the Austrian Succession. This otherwise popular move was marred by the king's indiscreet decision to bring along Marie-Anne de Mailly, whom he had ennobled as the Duchess of Châteauroux. In August, the king fell gravely ill in Metz. Death appeared imminent, and public prayers were held all across France to ask God to save the king from a certain death. Pressed by the anti-absolutist dévote party at court, the king's chaplain refused to give him absolution unless the king renounced his mistress. The king's confession was distributed publicly, which embarrassed him and tarnished the prestige of the monarchy. Although Louis's recovery earned him the epithet well-beloved from the public relieved by his survival, the events at Metz diminished his standing. The military successes of the War of the Austrian Succession inclined the French public to overlook Louis's adulteries, but after 1748, in the wake of the anger over the terms of the Treaty of X La Chapelle, pamphlets against the king's mistresses became increasingly widely published and read.